Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today we're going to learn how to create this beautiful fairy garden house. Now, if you have the Pixie&Me full embroidery kit, you'll have one sheet like this which has got your chosen name on it. For this stitch, we're going to be using the back stitch, and I've linked the tutorial on how to do a back stitch in the description. I would suggest cutting around your name, and then you've got lots of leftover stick and stitch that you could use for later projects. Sheet number 2 is our florals. This is our standard Pixie florals. I have linked the tutorial on how to do these, the mushrooms and the flowers, as well as the ladybugs, the butterflies and the bumblebees as well, is all in the description. So you can find the tutorial on how to do that in there. There are some florals in multiple sizes there. And sheet number 1 is all of our gorgeous little creatures and our fairy house. So we've got, there is a snail has been cut out. That's for our other project. We've got bumblebees and we've got 2 sizes of the fairy doors, as we didn't know what size garment you'd be stitching on. But today we're going to be looking at the fairy house. So let's get our garment ready, and then we're just going to peel the little house off the backing paper and position it onto our garment where we want to. Now for this project and this video, I am going to hoop my garment. This isn't necessary, but for this one I decided to put it in a hoop. So, but again, it isn't crucial if you don't have a hoop. Now I've just threaded onto my needle about 1.5 meters of the green yarn, and we're just going to go in and do the daisy stems. Now this is going to be a very simple back stitch. We're just going to pull our needle up from our starting point, making sure to leave a tail underneath to tie off to later. We're going to go a stitch length away, which is roughly about 1.5 to 2 centimeters. I'm not very good at measurements, but I think that's about right. And we're just going to follow the lines and do a very simple back stitch for this. This is very, very beginner friendly to start off with. Now, because the next daisy is a little bit further away, I'm just going to take my needle and thread it through my work. So that just brings my needle down to a better position so that I can start on the next daisy. And we're just going to continue with our back stitch here. So once I've popped that last stitch in, I'm just going to turn my garment over. I'm just going to thread my needle through my work to bring these 2 tails together. And once they're together, I can tie them together in a triple knot and then cut away the excess ends. Now, I don't mind having a few knots on this because I'm going to be putting an interfacing over my work. This is a very detailed project, so some interfacing is definitely going to be needed. Next, I've threaded on about an armful of the white yarn, and I'm going to go in with our simple daisy. This is simple because it is very beginner friendly and it is nothing too complicated. It's just a whole heap of little straight stitches, and because these daisies are only quite small, we get away with doing them with just a little straight stitch here. So I'm just going to go around my flower and just pop a little straight stitch into each one, and then once I'm done there, I can do my threading underneath and tie off those ends again. And if you're a regular embroiderer like me, you'll know that this is one of the most irritating parts of embroidery, but unfortunately it's not all glam when it comes to stitching these projects. So once I pop that last stitch in, I'm just going to obviously tie those two little ends together underneath again. And we're just going to go ahead and do the other two daisies. Next, I've threaded on just a little bit, probably about half an armful of the yellow yarn or whatever color yarn you're going to do for your centers. I'm going to pull that up and leave a tail underneath to tie off to. And again, we're just going to make this very beginner friendly. We're just going to pop 2 or 3 little straight stitches into the center of these daisies. Now, if you are a follower of Pixie&Me, you know we usually do French knots, lazy daisies. We usually do our daisies a little bit more complicated, but I really like that these projects are so much more beginner friendly. So this is why we pop these into our projects, which just makes it so much easier to work with. So now that our daisies are all done, we're going to have a look at the roof of the house. Now I'm taking my washable fabric marker that comes inside my kit, and I'm just going to mark out these lines on the roof of the house, because the stitch we're going to be using here is the basket weave, and this is hands down my most favorite stitch that I do. It just looks so great when it's finished, and it is the perfect stitch for a little fairy house. The spacing here is roughly about 1 centimetre, and it doesn't need to be completely perfect. Once I've done that, I've just threaded onto my yarn a very generous armful of whichever colour you're going to do for your roof of your house. You're going to pull all of that yarn through and leave a tail underneath. I've gone with the light brown thick yarn here, and I'm just going to now do a straight stitch for every single one of those little lines that I've just created. And once I've popped that last stitch in, I'm just going to take my threaded needle and I'm just going to take it to where I want to start my basket weave. So I'm just going to feed it right to the top there, and then I can start with the basket weave. For this one, we're just going to bring our needle to the top section here. So I'm just going to pop it up there, and then using the opposite end of the needle, we're just going to do an over, under method here. So I'm just going to go over, under, and pull that through. Then you'll just need to position that yarn into place. So you can do this with the back end of your needle again. And we're just going to anchor down that stitch now at the top. I'm then just going to bring my needle up from just under where I've just anchored that down, and I'm going to do it the reverse way. Now, the important thing for a basket weave is to always look at your last stitch. So my last stitch was over, which means my first stitch now needs to be under. So we're just going to do that under, over, pull it all the way through, and then anchor that down once I've positioned that yarn into place. And now as I'm moving down the roof, you'll see that I'm picking up a new row. So the trick here is to look at the second one in and see that that one is over, which that one now needs to be under. So my first one needs to go over. It's a bit confusing, but you'll know what I mean when you start doing it, so long as it is the opposite way to the row that you just created. So let's pull that through, and then we can anchor that down with a stitch and then place it into position. And we're just going to continue like this now until the whole of the roof is completely full. And once complete, we're just going to then track through our work and find those two tails, bring them together and tie them in a triple knot. And once that's all finished, I'm going to use the dark brown thin yarn to do my windows. And for this, I'm just going to go in and do a back stitch. So I'm just going to bring my needle up from my starting point, pull it all the way through and leaving a small tail underneath to tie off to. We're going to go a stitch length away and pull that through. We're then going to move forward another stitch length and bring our needle back onto the previous stitch, and this is how we do a back stitch. Now if you're finding some of these stitches are moving a little bit too quickly, I have also linked in the description a basic stitches tutorial as well, so you can go and brush up on your skills as well by using that tutorial, which is a little bit more slower and detailed. We're just going to continue like this all the way around the window and then the bottom window sill as well. Now I've got the cross in the middle of the window, but I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So I'm just going to now take my yarn off my needle and I'm going to thread on some yellow yarn. I want to infill that window with some yellow yarn to make it look like the little light is on inside the fairy house. So you'll only need a small amount of yarn for this, about 1/2 meter, and we're just going to go in with a satin stitch here and fill in this section. Once underneath, I'm just going to tie that off together in a triple knot, and then I'm going to rethread on my thin brown yarn so that I can complete the little cross inside the window. And this is just going to be done with 2 little straight stitches. And once that's all finished, we are again going to tie off underneath as we have been doing. Now you will notice on this project there are 2 windows, but I'm only going to be using the one, so we're going to move on and just ignore that second window there. You can use it if you like, it is exactly the same stitch as the first one. I'm going to do the door frame here, so I've added some more thin brown yarn onto my needle, and we're going to go in with a chain stitch. Now to do a chain stitch, we bring our needle up from our starting point and then back down to create this loop. We're then going to come a stitch length away and hook our needle over and pull, and you'll see that you've created this little chain. We're then going to take our needle and we're going to put it back down through that chain we just created, pulling it through to create that loop, and then come up a stitch length away and then hook that loop back over your needle and then pull through. And this is how we do a chain stitch. There are again some tutorials, or lots of tutorials on our YouTube channel if you're finding this a little bit too quick, but this is simply the method we're going to do to continue around the door frame and then also for the little doorstep as well. And once I'm here, I'm just going to anchor that down, and then I'm going to turn my work over and I'm just going to thread my needle back through my work so that these 2 little tails, which I've snagged, but that's okay, there we go. We're just going to thread back through our work to bring these 2 tails together, and we can tie them in a triple knot and snip away. And we're just going to repeat that also for the little doorstep as well. Next, I'm going to put onto my needle a really good armful of the pink yarn. Now, usually for a project like this, I would do a short and long stitch. It always looks really nice and uniformed. However, we have got a daisy that sits pretty much covering most of the left side of the house. So to get around this, we're going to have to do lots of little short straight stitches. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's bring our yarn up and leave a tail underneath. And we're just going to go around this daisy the best you can by doing lots of short stitches. So let's get around the daisy and then around the window as well and the top of the door. And then I'll show you when we move on to the right side how I do my short and long. So we're going to continue like that, and I've filled in pretty much most of this house now with lots of random straight stitches. But for the short and long, you'll see here I've gone for a short stitch. Now I'm going to do a nice big long stitch, and there's a nice little gap there. And then next to that, I'll do another short stitch, and this just gives it a nice uniformed look. I do really love the short and long stitch. Unfortunately, it wasn't practical for all of this project due to the daisy that sits on the left side, but it still gives a really nice little cottagey look as well. So if you find that you've run out of yarn or anything like that, you can just take the yarn off your needle, rethread on some more yarn and continue. All you need to make sure is that you tie off those ends underneath. There's nothing complicated about switching yarn or changing or adding extra yarn on as well. So we're just going to finish filling in this gorgeous little house, and then we can tie off underneath. Now you may find that once you've filled in your house, you need to just sort of go over this daisy a little bit. It might have got a little bit swamped amongst all of the little stitches. So I find that just going over this and giving it a little bit more volume makes it sort of stand out a little bit more. Next, I'm going to put on my needle a good armful of the thin brown yarn, and I'm just going to go in here with the chimney and do a satin stitch all the way to the top, and then I'm just going to finish off with a few straight stitches across the top of the chimney. Once I'm done here, I'm just going to thread my yarn back together and tie off those two ends in a triple knot. Next, I've grabbed my fabric marker and I've just highlighted those lines inside the door. I've put on a good armful of the same colour yarn that I used for the roof. I'm just going to go in with a few straight stitches to fill in this section here, and then I'm going to do a contrasting colour, which I'm going to use the thin brown again, and fill in those alternating lines next to it to give it that sort of old cottagey wooden look. So you'll see here, I'm just going to fill in the gaps now with the other yarn, and this just gives it a little bit of contrast. Now I did realize I forgot to film the little path. Now just for the outline of that, we used just a back stitch. It was nice and simple. And that's all now finished, so let's get this washed off. So all you're going to do is place your garment under a cold running tap, and you might just need to use your hand just to give it a bit of a rub to get some of the stabilizer to start to peel. But after about 60 seconds, you'll notice that it starts to melt away. Once you're happy that all of the stabilizer has now gone, all you'll need to do is flat lay your garment to dry, and then you're good to go. You can follow the other tutorials which I've linked in the description and place them wherever you like. You can put as many flowers as you like, as many insects or creatures. It's entirely up to you. This wildflower garden is all your design. I really, really hope you've enjoyed doing this stitching. If you need any help at all, please don't be frightened to reach out and contact me. But I really love this one. Happy, happy stitching, guys.